Hey everybody, today I'm going to talk about past life regression and life between lives regression and what is the difference. Most of you may have heard about past life regression, but life between life regression is not all that known. Unless, of course, you have heard about Dr. Michael Newton, who is the pioneer in the field of life between life regression, and he has become world famous by his best-selling books, Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls. Now, let me start out with going over what past life regression is and how this is beneficial. Now, past life regression is really going back in a hypnotic state. We use the subconscious mind for that, going down and down and down into your past, into your childhood, and then from there we cross over into a past life regression. So what happens is, when the mind, due to a prolonged induction, slowly changes the brain waves from a normal beta consciousness down to an alpha consciousness and down into a theta consciousness, the mind there, the waves of the mind become really elongated. And in these elongated waves, the mind starts to open up to a higher form of consciousness. So this memory in this higher state of consciousness is not really in this physical body, okay? Because obviously if we assume that past life regression is real, then where are these memories stored? I mean, this body of this last life, the last lives, is gone. So if that memory would be embedded in a brain or somewhere in the brain, then obviously that brain is either cremated or buried somewhere and you wouldn't have access to that memory. So the assumption is that we are a soul. And the soul has wrapped around it different layers of tendencies. And these tendencies are basically the accumulation of the conditioning and the impressions that we have gathered over time. And it is believed that, for example, this is what you can see in Kirlian photography. If you take a photo of the auras, you may see the different colors, and that is both the state of mind of today, but it is also the deeper layers of the overall tendencies and the overall evolution of what somebody has achieved, gone through and experienced. Now, it is believed that as we die, that soul, which is believed to be always perfect, but it is temporarily encapsulated by these impressions, that soul moves on and over. And these impressions are all stored in that, what we call the subtle body, the astral body. And so it is not going away, right? And so as we go into a new birth, we carry with us this, accumulation of tendencies. And it's like a lens. This is then how we go through birth and death. And we experience through that lens our lives at that moment. And so imagine there would be no tendencies whatsoever, and this accumulation of tendencies would be all cleaned up. We would see a complete different world, but we see it through the lens of the tendencies we have accumulated. Now, as we go back into the past life, the soul in this life kind of starts to disassociate from the tendencies of this life, and becomes in this theta state of consciousness. It starts to go back to its origin of its soul identity. And there it is able to access the information that lies basically beyond the conditioning of this life, right? However, it still works through this subconscious mind and this pattern, and that's why it's able to speak in the language that you're born with now. That's why it's able to express through the symbology and the metaphors and the conditioning of the current time and day, age in which we live. So that's how then it uses that language of the current subconscious conditioning to get in touch with that conditioning of the past lives. And that's why it's able to speak. That's why the soul, your higher consciousness, is able to speak. And we are able to get in touch with these tendencies of the past. Now, a lot of people ask me always, well, can you bring me back to this life or that life? Perhaps somebody has done a past life regression before and they like to go back and go deeper. But the funny thing is, at that moment, as we do the regression, it is very rare that you can actually go back to a specific birth. Why? Because it's not the conscious intention of the therapist or the conscious mind of you in this birth that has the power to access that. Unless you are able to do this in your own conscious mind, you're able to go in a meditative state and that will go back there. But you have to be a very advanced yogi. And this is where the therapist comes in. They help you cross over, basically decondition, kind of disconnect from the conditioning of this birth. And that's why we do the past life regression. That's why you need a facilitator in 99 out of 100 cases. Because, it's very rare for somebody to access that consciously. Now, the ideal would be that you could, in meditation, go straight from your normal beta consciousness into this theta consciousness. But because we have difficulty doing this, we use the subconscious mind as a trapdoor. So we go from beta to alpha to theta. This is basically actually the same route that we take every night when we go to sleep. We go from beta to alpha to theta, and then actually we go to delta. The only difference is we're able to keep you at that theta consciousness for as long as it takes. As long as you have the stamina, and as long as we don't get disturbed in any way or shape. So as we go back into this life, then what happens? A higher consciousness seems to take over, and it seems to always determine where to go. And it's uncanny. I've done, I don't know how many of these past life regressions, and it always knows, the higher self always knows which life is relevant. Of course, we give the instruction, go back to the most relevant experience, or the most relevant past life that is now of importance to you in the context of your life today. And that is really the point of why we do a past life regression. Now, what I do normally when I work with people, they have a choice to do a separate past life regression, in which case we would do multiple lives in one session. But when we do a life between life regression, we generally do only one past life. Even then, the soul knows where to go back and what is important to remember today. And the whole idea of past life regression is that it allows us for a context. Because if we have lived many lives, today, obviously, I am the sum total of my evolution, all the things that I have done. And I express myself, I feel, I react to the world based on the conditioning, not only of this life, but obviously of all these lives I have lived. It also explains why children of the same family are also different. You're not just the product of genetic conditioning, environmental conditioning, parental influence. Yes, this is of course very important, but the question is, why am I born with these parents, with these tendencies, with this body? And that is because of all the accumulated tendencies. And that's why you can see that though the same genetic material, the same environmental situations take place with all the different children in the family, they're all very different. Sometimes somebody may be very evolved in the same family and somebody is not, because they may have chosen this birth for whatever reason to face certain challenges, to accelerate certain aspects of their growth, and so on and so forth. So as we go back to the past life, we start to see patterns. Sometimes, the soul goes back to remind us, like, oh my God, I have already been through this experience, and this explains why today I am who I am. I have certain tendencies and I understand now. I have certain problems and I understand now. Or I have certain talents, certain things I already, have worked out, and I'm reminded to not forget the accomplishments of my past. So it's not all negative, you see. On the other hand, mostly we are ordinary people. Yes, trust me, I have seen it all. I have seen some incredible people in my office that have the most amazing lives. But 9 out of 10 people are just ordinary people that evolve over time. And by ordinary, I don't mean average. No. The lives we have lived sometimes are very simple. You could be a peasant, you could be a hunter, You could have been just somebody living in some town, in some city, in the forest, or in whatever country. But what's significant is not so much the events that have taken place as the experiences we've had and how we learned, how we changed, how the soul drew its lessons from those experiences and then moved on and on and on into a better life, into a better unfoldment of consciousness. And that is the idea. The idea is that that soul, going through all these lifetimes, tries to liberate itself. Otherwise, what's the point? We have to just keep going and going and going. The idea is that these accumulated tendencies that the soul then takes from birth to birth, as we learn to evolve ourselves, these layers become thinner. So we do that through just living our lives with consciousness and trying to be good and do good, and we can do it. We can accelerate it through yogic practices, breathing exercises, meditation, prayer, and whatever tradition we may come from, it doesn't really matter. So these layers become thinner. The veil, as a matter of fact, goes away. And the definition of yoga is yoga, citta, vritti, nirodha. It means the cessation of the waves of the mind. But these waves of the mind, these are these subconscious and the deeper unconscious tendencies of our life and our lives. There's a superficial, vibratory field of the stuff that's going on today. But remember, these have been set in motion by the karmic forces of our past lives. For example, somebody may react to an event and somebody may not react. The event is the same, but why does somebody react? You see? Because of old tendencies. But somebody who has gone through that, has learned their lessons, they may not at all react to it. The same event, no reaction or a very strong reaction, and these waves in the mind happen accordingly. So there's a two-tier level of frequencies in the mind. One is the current events of our life, and then they are caused by the deeper tendencies of our past lives. And so we need to understand these patterns in order to bring fundamental change. You see, you can try to change the superficial tendencies of our lives, but it's as if you're rowing a boat and the anchor is out and you're rowing and rowing, but the old tendencies of the past lives are holding us back, you see. And this is a problem for us. And so the benefit of the past life regression is we're able to lift that anchor, or at least become aware of the anchor. Right? So that's why it's really a therapy of sorts, because as we are going through the session, we're not just experiencing it, we're going to kind of then afterwards have an overview, a review. That soul is still in some form of deconditioning from this life, and we're able to talk about what just happened in this life, what did you learn, what are the main issues and tendencies that we need to discuss. And often, great understanding is gained, and also a great sense of relief and a release can be achieved. And so this is very powerful. I've seen incredible things happening with people just going back to the past and understanding these patterns. And then they can see in comparison with this life. Maybe in that session itself, we would start to compare the experiences of that life or these lives with the tendencies in this life. And then the soul kind of goes above that and starts to see what's going on with me right now and what are the things that I need to change. So the past life regression is really very contextual. It gives us a context of who I am today and why. So it's very, very powerful. But there is more. Wait, there is more. And that is the life between lives regression. See, that is the genius of Dr. Michael Newton, who was a psychoanalyst, and he, like Brian Weiss, they use hypnosis in their practice to basically sometimes regress people. And when we mean regression in the sense of psychotherapy, it's not necessarily past life regression. They may regress somebody to childhood issues or even to womb issues. I mean, I do actually, when I work with people, we do a womb regression. So we bring people back to a state in their early childhood or even before birth. And it is very, very powerful, even in this life regression. But you have to know what you're doing, because this can be potentially harmful if you're not trained well, because we don't want somebody to get stuck in a particular age. That's why age regression in this life is generally limited to psychoanalysts. And when we go back to these different ages, what Brian Weiss and Michael Newton found, suddenly, accidentally, they had people go back into a past life. Now you read Many Lives, Many Masters and Brian Weiss. It's an incredible, fascinating, worldwide story, right? And the benefits have been clearly described in his work, how this girl got completely transformed. What Michael Newton did was, he didn't do it consciously, because he wasn't really a fan, or perhaps not even much aware of the concept of past life regression. I mean, he was an American. He must probably just be a Christian or an intellectual that maybe not really was in any way spiritually inclined, but he was very intelligent and very aware. And he found suddenly that in this regression, people not just jumped back to a past life, they jumped back to a life between life. In other words, after they died in the last life, they suddenly found themselves in an in-between world before they took this birth. And he was astonished. He said, what happened? This happened not just once, this happened several times with several of his clients. It's just like Brian Weiss. The girl went back and back and back to the past. And so he became fascinated. He did, literally without anybody knowing, more than 3,000 sessions with different clients, only to discover that there was a parallel, that there were certain things that were all identical. There was a structure of this life between lives before somebody took birth. He started to discover that there are greater beings that seem to be guiding us, that seem to guide us into a new birth, that seem to talk with us about stuff that has happened in our last lives, overviews and so on and so forth. There are even places where healing took place in the afterlife, where certain damages to our soul were kind of repaired. Well, the soul never really gets damaged, but the overall tendencies that wrapped around the soul, the memories were traumatized, and there were places where, that kind of healing could take place. And there was a whole world out there. And he was astonished. He really was astonished. And he recorded all this because he was a scientist by nature and by trade. So he started to record these sessions and made it into a document. And many, many years later, he published them in his first book, Journey of Souls, that became an incredible bestseller. Then, after it became Destiny of Souls, and then later on there were some other works that he did. And he found there to be a therapeutic, healing effect even beyond past life regression. Because you see, what is the fundamental difference between a past life regression and a life between life regression? And as a matter of fact, the life between life regression, the very point is that difference. When a soul goes from the past life into an in-between state, a life between life world, it is deconditioned from any kind of life. See, when you're still in a past life regression, you're still identified with the consciousness, the time, the situation of that day and age. And so you would express yourself also based on the memories and conditionings of how you were able to express yourself in those days. So I have people change their voices when they go into the past life. There are cases of people speaking in tongues, different languages. I've seen all kinds of strange things happen when people go back into that past life. But when we go into the life between lives, suddenly you're not, Johnny of the past life, you're not Ahmed, you're not, Pooja, you're not, whoever you may have been in that past life. You are suddenly the soul, the self, the greater consciousness. And so, though you have these, the totality of these tendencies wrapped around you, you're not really in some double layer of conditioning that is that life you're in, right? So like I told you earlier, we have these two layers of conditioning. One is the one of this life that is conditioned by your parents, the way they raise you, by your environment, the country, the culture, and then your genes, your body, the brain you step into. We actually, when we regress people, we ask you, well, how is this brain working for you? You see, you're not the brain, you're not the body. But in this life, you have to work with the brain you have been given. Sometimes we have a slower brain, sometimes a faster brain. Doesn't mean you're better when you have a faster brain. We know a lot of politicians have great brains, but there's nothing spiritual about them. It's just a genetic thing that you work with in this life. But perhaps somebody may have a slower brain, but a high degree of awareness. We know that. We have met people that are very simple-minded. Perhaps they have never gone to school, they have never done any great things in their life. But when you talk to them, you know this is an advanced being, you see. So the brain power as such and the physiology as such is not a determining, characteristic of somebody who's greatly evolved. No. So the double layer is the one layer of conditioning that we work with in this life, and then there's the underlying overall, accumulated tendencies of all these lives. And so when we're in this in-between state, we carry basically only that shield, that accumulation of our overall state of existence. And that's also how then we will express ourselves in the life between lives. Because you see, we still have to talk. When I ask questions in that session, you will answer. You'll not answer in some sort of strange language, you will answer in the language that you are used to speaking now. So we're working through and with the symbology, the conditioning of this life. So we're not deactivating your consciousness, we're going into a higher state of consciousness, but it still uses your current physiology and your brain power in order to be able to express yourself. So we're never deactivating your consciousness, we're raising your consciousness. And it speaks then almost through you. It's amazing how that works, it's fascinating. And so in this life between lives state, we get a glimpse of who we are. I have people, not once, but many people, they have actually gone into an ecstasy where they couldn't believe that they were not a body, that they were not a mind, that they were the soul. In fact, people in ecstasy, in tears, in incredible states of consciousness, where they because you see the veil is thin at that time. You're connecting to a universal awareness, to a God consciousness, to a higher universal awareness, when your own layers are so thin. And that is the whole idea, is it not? Even in this life, that we thin those layers. When yoga, chitta, vritti, nirodha, when we seize the waves of the mind at both levels, that higher consciousness is able to express itself. We can do that in this birth, which is ideal, that we want to do. But when you're in this life between lives, you see, we help you already disconnect from the noise of this current life. And so you're much closer to a higher state of consciousness. You're kind of ethereal. The veil is so thin. The vrittis, the tendencies, the waves of the mind have become almost quiet. Yes, there's still a veil. Yes, there's still a me consciousness. But the veil being so thin, we're able to reach out into that greater consciousness. And that's why we're able then to connect to ancestors, which is obviously something that happens all the time in these sessions. We're able to connect to spirit guides, to greater beings that are there. We're able to connect to the God consciousness at large. You see, and this is where the past life regression differs from the life between life regression. Now, Michael Newton always wanted us to do both in one session, and that's what I've always done, and that's what I always will do. We do them both because they're both, important. One is contextual, one is highly spiritual, and so it's like two wings on the same bird. We need both to understand. We need a context in which to see who I am, why I am, what I am, but yet in the context of today's life, because at the end of the day I want to bring back that knowledge and change myself. I want to change my life, you see. And so the knowing that I am that consciousness beyond all birth and death, imagine when you bring it back to this consciousness of this every day-to-day life, is that practical? Yes, it is, because you see, I have now a place of refuge. It's not an escape. No, it's a chunking up. In NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, we have this terminology. It's called chunking up. It means a bird's eye view. I can, when there's a problem in my life or problems, I can lift myself above it. I can chunk up. I can be like the bird and so to say, oh yeah, well, this is this life. These are these circumstances, but this is not the overall reality of who I am, what I am. I'm able to detach, not as an escape, but as a sense of pause, as a sense of reflection, as a sense of analysis, as a sense of comparison, and that's where the past life comes in. I had this tendency, I must overcome this issue that I had in a previous life. I need to overcome that, not run away, and when I am able to put myself above that, knowing that I am the self, I can even detach myself from all these tendencies and say, listen, I need to work this out in order to free myself. These tendencies is blocking the manifestation of happiness in my life, you see. And when these waves of the mind cease, I'm able to connect to everybody, to everybody's heart, to an understanding that is way beyond me, you, and all things. And so, this life between life regression, when done properly, is highly transformational. Irrespective of what we find in this session, what information you receive, just for a moment, imagine you're able to disconnect from the conditioning of this life and you just touch, even for a second, that sense of self that I am beyond all birth and death. I mean, it's transformational. It will put everything in perspective. I suddenly know, wow, I'm that. And you find all the spiritual traditions achieve that, try to achieve that. Ramana Maharshi, I am that. Why is that important? Is it practical? Yes, it is highly practical for the reasons I just explained. In yoga, we're trying to seize the waves of the mind. Why? To experience that, you see. So, is it practical? Yes, highly practical. And a part of all of that, it's a fantastic experience. Because the peace, that prolonged theta wave helps us, I mean, that we feel when we're in this session, it is the ultimate relaxation. So, it is, and relaxation obviously is very beneficial to you, your nervous system, and your life at large. So, this is what I wanted to tell you about past life regression and life between lives regression. It is a wonderful experience, and I suggest that if you get the time, find somebody in your area that can do this and try, you see. People sometimes say, hey, is it not a shortcut? Is it not cheating on the idea of yoga and self-realization? Some spiritual masters have said that, you know, hypnotherapy is bad for you, but you see, many of these masters that said that at that time didn't even know what we were doing today. The science has expanded so much. People's awareness has expanded so much. And all that we do really is change a brain wave within your consciousness. We're not trying to manipulate anything. We're not forcing anything. We help you basically relax. We help you get in touch with a higher state of consciousness. Now, how can this be bad for you? It is not. It is something that actually will trigger an accelerated growth in our lives. I have seen people fundamentally change afterwards. I've never had somebody says, oh my God, you changed something for the worse in my life. I've never changed anything. They themselves go into a state of wonderful consciousness, calm themselves down, and what is wrong with that? What we are doing really is a guided meditation, but a guided meditation on steroids, you see. And we help you, and that's where the facilitator comes in, we help you quiet some of the noise that you have difficulty quieting yourself. You see, that's all that we really do. We help you calm the mind, and then you yourself drop into your own higher consciousness. We're not doing anything. The facilitator is not leading you anywhere. The facilitator is just responsible for helping you come into that theta state of consciousness, right? And so it's a wonderful experience. It's very healthy, it's beneficial, and spiritually awakening. So I would say try it out. You know, the proof is in the pudding, and see what happens. In my case, with all the hundreds of people I've seen, it has been nothing but a wonderful, wonderful experience. Thank you. That's what I wanted to share with you today. I hope this is of benefit to you. And I suggest, if you want to try and dabble in this, start by reading Journey of Souls first, then Destiny of Souls, and it will give you a nice context of what this is all about. Thank you so much. Until the next time.